Okay, go.
Hey, all right, thank you, Jan. I would like to introduce you all to Mike O'Connor. He is a bucket list adventurer. He's, after many years as a consulting engineer and entrepreneur, he's now pursuing all the things he didn't seem to have time for. Adventure travel photography is one passion that keeps him going. Just like boating and volunteering for the world famous Calgary Stampede. After so many years of reading, writing, engineering reports, he now says that he finds writing about adventures can be a lot of fun as well. Welcome, Mike. We're so glad to have you part of our big family tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us about.
Thanks, Evie. I'm delighted to be here and to see all of your smiling faces, and hope you're all well and not too distressed by the thing that's keeping us all from traveling. Let me just go to the first slide, if I can. And I'm going to go share screen. And have to move your lovely faces out of the way to get to the... So Janet, just wave your arm if you can see it. Okay, great. So tonight is going to be light and fluffy. There's nothing very taxing about what I have to say. The talk is entitled F8 and Be There, the Influence of Style on Bucket List Adventuring with a Camera. I'm sure you'll remember these guys. Jack Nicholson and his good friend became mortally distressed. So they went around the world and pursued their bucket list. My wife, Guyana, and I decided to do the same thing. We weren't distressed, but when we retired about 8 years ago, we decided to spend the rest of our days with our cameras, going everywhere we could in the world. But photography was not just going to be a way to document our adventures. Photography was going to, oh, that didn't work here. Photography was going to inform our adventures, and adventures would inform our photography. What I meant by that is that we did not choose to go to any place that we didn't think we could get good pictures. But in the act of getting good pictures, it completely changed the adventures that we had. When we got home, however, we looked at our portfolios and we could see that we saw completely different things, even though we were on the same trip, because every photographer has their own personal style. Style, in my opinion, is made up of at least 4 elements. What you shoot with, that's your equipment, where you go to shoot, what kind of things you shoot, and how you interact with other people while you're shooting. Let's examine those elements for Jana and I. So the technical ones, of course, for 60 years, I was a Canon guy and I carried 2 cameras around. When I got old, I'm 75, just about to turn 76 in a few days, I found that carrying 2 cameras was a bit much for me. And so I switched to the Sony mirrorless cameras, the A9, and now I have an A1 as well. So I'm back to carrying 2 cameras again, but these are light and easy for me to travel as opposed to the Canon. When we travel, we very seldom use a tripod. Sometimes we may take a tripod with us, but I can't count the number of times the tripod never made it out of my suitcase. And we shoot with flash, but only the flash comes out when we're shooting in the jungle. And when we're in the jungle, we usually use some sort of device on the flash that increases the amount of light that goes on the subject by 2 or 3 f-stops. This particular one is called a better beamer. It's just a Fresnel lens, plastic Fresnel lens on a plastic thing that you just wrap around your flash, and it makes everything brighter, especially when they're at the top of the canopy. The better beamer sells in the US for about 50 bucks on Amazon. And if you're ever going to go shoot in the jungle, this is well worth to have. Completely collapses in your gear so it doesn't take any space up in your bag. When I was shooting with Canon, my go-to lens was the 28-300, but of course I also had a 100-400, and I shot a lot my second body with a 16-35. When I switched over to Sony, I did exactly the same thing almost. My wide angle lens was a 12 to 24, but my go-to lens was a 24 to 240. And I have a 100 to 400 and a 200 to 600, which doesn't get used much outside of birding, but the 24 to 240 I use almost every day. You'll see in the images that I show you that my perspective is a little different than you might learn about what makes good common sense in a camera club. For me, I often shoot looking up and straight into the sun. Sometimes I'd like to shoot down on things. I'm only 5'7", so it means to get a picture like this, I have to stand on a chair or get a little ladder or something to get a different perspective. And I like to engage the subjects, and I like to immerse myself in the photography. Indeed, I like to immerse myself in the photograph. So in this case, I was in Mexico and I saw a little balloon man holding a big stack of balloons. I wanted a picture that was a little different than you'd normally get. So I just took my wide angle lens, put it on the body, and put the body looking upwards on the hand of the balloon man as he was holding the lines. So the little streaks that you see coming from the center are just the strings that are attached to the balloons that go around his hand. When Jan and I travel, we hardly ever go cruising. The reason for that is simple. As much as we're after good photographs, we're also after adventures. And I find that cruising for me is not much of an adventure because you spend 2 or 3 days cruising from place to place, and those 3 days are lost for me. I spend the time on my laptop or on my iPhone looking at my pictures or reading, but I'm not taking more pictures very often when we're on the ocean. So I like to go by car or by plane, get there quickly by plane or by car, where you can stop every once in a while and get out. So you have your adventures between destinations and not just at the destinations themselves. When we get home, we use Photoshop and Lightroom to process our images. Right now on my other computer in the office that I'm sitting in, I have 411,000 Lightroom Classic images, more than enough to keep me busy during COVID. You'll see also, when you look at the pictures as I present them to you, I often crop horizontal. So I don't adhere to the 4:6 or 2:3 aspect ratio very often. I shoot wide and then I crop to suit the image as I see it. And when I process it, I seldom process for accuracy. I mostly process for feeling. In this case, making a little misty and out of focus, or adding these bright starry effects on this cowboy who's going through a tunnel. Sometimes I even make him into digital prints. They look like paintings when I'm done. In fact, I like this one so much, I actually changed it and made it into an acrylic painting. I'm sure some of you are old enough to remember this guy, Ouija. His real name was Arthur Felix. He was a US crime photographer, and he was famous in the 1940s and 50s because he had a police band radio in his car and he could get to a crime scene before the police. So he got these great pictures, and people often asked him, what's the secret, Ouija, for taking these good pictures? And his answer was simple. F8 and be there was his answer. F8 and be there. And by F8, he meant have the camera preset for your anticipated exposure. And be there was go to where the action is, get there first, be the first one to see what's happening. Our mantra when we started to travel then, Jana and I, our mantra became F8 and be there. So we wanted to be ready and we wanted to be where the action was going to be. But in 2020, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And so now I'm quite shaky. And so I've had to change my mantra from F8 and be there to 1/1000th and be there. And if I shoot on 1/1000th or sometimes with a longer lens, 1/2000th, I can still get a sharp shot. The question, of course, for Jan and I is, where is there? And that's the geographic component of our style. And for us, it means going to places where many people don't want to go. Places like Namibia in Africa, Myanmar, although I don't know if I'd go there today because of the coup that has gone on there recently. Strange places that you don't normally go, like Argentina, the south tip of South America, Ushuaia. Even Greenland, if you want to go to Greenland, see snow, you better get there quick because it's melting so quick right now. In a few years, there won't be much snow left there. Or Guyana, a great place for photographers. Guyana is a place that doesn't have much infrastructure for tourists. They don't get many tourists there, but they have adequate accommodation if you don't mind sleeping with bats on the ceiling and tarantulas on the wall and the scorpions in the shower. If you don't mind that, you can get some great wildlife pictures there. And it's very, very cheap to go to Guyana. Antarctica, of course, is on the other end of the scale. It's expensive to go there. There are lots of things to shoot besides penguins, not the least of which is some great landscapes. I like to go to places in Southeast Asia and Africa. I like to go to places like Nepal, where you can have somebody for a few dollars a day, $2 or $3 or $4, carry all your camera equipment for you as you go trekking through the mountains. So you can switch from your 12 to 24 lens to your 600 millimeter lens, and then give it back to him and he carries it to the next stop you want to use it. Or Indonesia is a fabulous place to go because the people are quite beautiful there and they have great sunsets, great landscapes. Or how about the Falkland Islands, where they're not very big, but they're filled with wildlife. You can go to the Falklands and you can spend 2 or 3 days there and never see a person other than the person that you've come with. But a picture like this, I got by being in the midst of 200,000 of these birds, all nesting at the same time. And I was only a couple of meters away from this bird when I took the picture. The birds don't seem to care about the people because they don't see anybody. They're not afraid of us. My first wife, my late wife, who died of cancer in 2004, grew up in India. So we went back to India very often. And this shot was taken looking west into Pakistan. I like to go to places that are politically unstable sometimes, as long as they're not too dangerous. So you see the killing fields of Cambodia, great place to get different pictures than you would normally think of about rather than going to London or New York or someplace like that. I show you this picture because I attest up front, I'm not a landscape photographer. I'm not good at it, I'm not interested in it, but I entered a contest, which I think in my whole life I've only entered 3 or 4 or perhaps 5 contests. But I entered this picture. It was a Kodachrome slide I took in Iceland, and I converted it to black and white because they had a black and white category. I submitted it to the judges, and lo and behold, it won the grand prize, which was in this case worth $25,000. So I thought I sent in some pretty good pictures to this contest, but this is the one that won. So I contacted the judges and said, I'm intrigued by what you found interesting in my photograph. And they said, we really like the way all the lines in the photograph converge on the church. I can tell you up front that when I took the picture, I didn't see any lines in the background. When I converted it to black and white, I never saw one line in the background. And when I submitted it, I didn't see any lines either. So that taught me something. First of all, I'm not a very good judge of what makes a photo, certainly in the judge's opinion. Number 2 is, since I don't understand what judges like most of the time, I shouldn't be shooting for judges. I should be just shooting for me and my eye. That's the way I'm going to get the most joy out of photography. So of course, as photographers, we get to shoot all sorts of different kinds of things. If you're a landscape photographer, of course, you're into sunrises and sunsets. For me, I don't get up for a sunset anymore. I'm too old and cranky in the morning. I've been burned too many times of getting up early and 5 o'clock and traipsing to the top of the mountain with my tripod, setting up in the rain, waiting for the sun to come up, only to find out it comes up behind a cloud and I get no shot. So I take a different approach in my old age. I go down to the beach, I order a margarita, I sit in a chair on the beach and I have my camera ready. If the sun goes down and it's spectacular, I stand up and take 3 shots, sit down again. If it's not spectacular, I never pick up the camera, I just pick up the margarita. Of course, being an engineer too, I love to go to places where they have some great architecture, particularly New York City, which has some great spots to shoot architecture. But this shot for New York City has been unusual because there's just 2 colors really, blue and kind of this orangey rust color in the bottom. And you don't see that very often because New York is a colorful place. And I think that this shot is made better because the flag that's the center of interest in the picture is not waving at full tilt. It's not a big wind, but it's not limp either. It's just the right image to make this a gentle picture. As I said, I'm not into landscapes, but sometimes you turn around and you see an S-curve somewhere and you remember, when I belonged to a camera club in 1968, they said S-curves were important and I should pay attention to them. And I turn around and lo and behold, there's an S-curve. And by the time I can get my camera out, a little bus has come along in it to provide the center of interest. I thought that was kind of neat. So I stayed at this location for another 20 minutes, hoping another bus would come along, but none did. So this is the only picture I got of the event. In some cases, you're overwhelmed by the landscape. This dune is several hundred feet tall. You can see this, how small the people are that are climbing it. And you can climb up the razorback there. So your right foot as you climb is in shadow and your left foot is in sunshine. Those are the kind of landscapes that I wouldn't overlook. Sometimes, of course, it's more chance than anything. Here I am going down the Burgundy River in France on a barge, and I'm having my breakfast and checking my emails on my iPhone. I look out the dirty window of the barge and see these 6 trees and think, you know, I could paint that picture. That would make a nice picture for our house. And so I take the picture right through the glass. I didn't even bother to go outside. And when I get home, I realized that, you know, you can't really see how dirty the window was. I think it makes a good picture all by itself. I don't have to repaint that. Mostly, Yana and I are street photographers. We like to shoot people in their daily lives, like this guy in Shanghai making sticky buns. Go about places where people do their daily life kind of thing. This fellow in Bhutan getting a shave. This lady in Harrods in London, England, putting on her makeup. Notice you can't see anything about her, but you can tell she takes care of herself because she's wearing nail polish and eyeshadow at the same time. Mostly we're about going down back alleys and peeking around corners and looking for different things, seeing what's behind the scene. And when this happened in Vietnam, I came across this small family having dinner on their patio. And the father of the family looked up and smiled at me and said in Vietnamese, "Come in, come in, come in." Now, you can imagine doing that in America, that some Vietnamese people come look in your house window and you say, "Come on in, come on in." That would never happen. But here, the people were very friendly. And so I went in and the guy asked me if I wanted to stay for dinner. I took a shot of them from above, as I often do, but I could see that they barely had enough food for themselves. So there was no way I was going to take anything off their table. And of course, being an engineer, I like symmetrical things, mechanical things. And this is the London Eye taken on New Year's Day, that when the fireworks were going off in London. The London Eye, by the way, is like a giant Ferris wheel. So I'm looking up at the Ferris wheel and you can see the blue lines along the bottom are the cars that the people sit in. But there's symmetry in things that are other than mechanical as well. For instance, this lady praying in Indonesia, you notice everything is symmetrical about her except for her left thumb. She's got some nail polish on there that she's obviously chewed off all of her fingers and the one thumb, but she hasn't finished getting it off her left thumb. And of course, as a photographer, who doesn't like to shoot little critters like this when you get an opportunity? With the Sony A9 and A1, it's got eye-controlled focus on it. So it automatically picks out the eye of the subject, be it a bird, a person, or an animal. It picks out the eye and it focuses on the eye no matter where the subject moves in your frame. So I know with my old Canons, if I tried to take this picture, the focus would jump from the eye to the foliage, which is in the foreground, and then back to the eye again. So it'd be a difficult shot to put the foliage really close to the eye. But with the A9 and the eye control focus, I'm sure now Nikon and Canon probably have exactly the same thing. You can get things close to the eye and still be focused on the eye. Or even when the eye is hardly visible, like in this chimpanzee. Even if the chimpanzee turned around with his back towards me and then came around again, it would pick up his eye again and focus on it. And of course, who doesn't like to shoot birds? Personally, I don't shoot birds anymore when sitting on a branch. They have to be flying for me or nest building, something like this, or this brown pelican fishing at the time. You can tell in this case, I was talking to somebody today who was complaining about people who shoot snowy owls and bait them with mice. This brown pelican has not been baited. I got him fishing in Florida, and I tried very hard once I saw where the school of fish were to get him to come towards me as he picked the fish out of the water, but he would never do that. When he came close, he would turn and go sideways, pick out the fish, go the other way. The A9, of course, and the A1, fantastic camera. This shot of a Franklin's gull was taken at a distance of about 200 feet. This gull is only about a foot long. So the camera focused on the eye, and as it turns out, as these gulls swoop at about 40 kilometers an hour, swoop through the air this way and that way, they're catching bugs, but you can't see the bugs with your naked eye. But in this case, and about 3 others, because of the eye control focus, I got the focus exactly on the eye and exactly on the bug that he's going to chomp on just a second. Some birds are bigger than others. This guy is called a cassowary. He's an Australian bird. Excuse me. He's about excuse me, about 5.5 feet tall, like an ostrich or an emu. And I was trying to get a shot of his face, but he kept turning his bum towards me and walking away. So undeterred, I went out and around approached him from a distance as he was eating on the ground. And when I got close enough, he picked up his head and looked at me. And I took this shot and a couple more, but then I looked at his eyes and said, you know, he doesn't look all that friendly. I should back up a little bit. I was only a few meters away from him for this shot. When I showed our guide the shot that I got, I was quite proud of it, but he said, I should be very careful because these birds don't like to be approached from the front, and they've been known to kill people in Australia with their claws. So I was lucky to get the shot and get out of there unharmed. But you don't have to go to Australia to get a shot of a bird. I was sitting at my desk where I'm talking to you now during when COVID first started and the winter was here, and I heard a great clacking of magpies outside. When I went to the window to look, the magpies were trying to attack this little solid owl. This owl is only 6 or 8 inches tall, and he was sitting in a spruce tree right outside my window eating a mouse. And as little as he was compared to the magpies, he wasn't giving up that mouse. So I always have my camera sitting beside me in the office anyways. So I just stood on the desk and slipped the screen off and took this one shot that I could see him through the spruce trees. Mostly I like to shoot people and things in action. So these young fellows jumping off the seawall in South Africa, or this fellow in Africa running. This is another example of why I don't kind of pay attention to the typical rules of photography. So instead of having the guy run into the picture, I like them running out of the picture better. On the right-hand side of the picture, of course, would have been weak, but it's bright because of the sun, and especially because the sun where he stepped has those bright spots. So that draws your eye back into the right side of the picture, balancing the picture a little bit, I think. And of course, being on the board of directors of the Calgary Stampede for 9 years, I got lots of opportunity to shoot rodeo pictures. In fact, I have more than 40,000 rodeo pictures. I don't shoot most of the rodeo now, except when the competitors come off their mounts. So I might wait there until he comes off or until the 8-second buzzer goes. If he gets a good ride, I don't shoot them anymore. I'm intrigued by pictures like this, where you can see the face of the horse, and the horse has all 4 feet off the ground. You can see the face of the cowboy, and he's just barely touching the ground before he's dumped. That doesn't happen very often, but if you can shoot at 20 to 30 frames a second, you can shoot enough images that no matter what level of photographer you are, you have to get a good one once in a while, just by luck. And here's a case of a bull rider was getting dismounted from this big bull. This bull is known as a spinning bull. Of course, he bucks, but mostly he dismounts the riders by spinning. When I took the picture, the background was in sharp focus, and it didn't give this impression that the bull was spinning too. So I just photoshopped it to give it a better impression that when I say it's a spinning bull, you get that feeling from the photoshopped elements in the background. I hope some of you have been to France to shoot the wild white horses of the Camargue in southern France. This is an experience not to be missed if you're into bucket list adventuring. These horses are driven by cowboys, or guardians they're called in France. A herd of them are driven towards you as you stand in the ocean, up to your thighs or sometimes your waist in water. These horses come towards you and they have to part on either side of you to get around you. They don't always do it very successfully, so you often get bumped by the horses as they go by. Certainly you get splashed and your camera gets all wet. But then the guardians pick up the herd of horses and goes back around to the back and drives them to you again. You can see what's going to happen here because it looks on first image that you have 4 horses. But if you look carefully, the horse that's second from the right is actually in front of another horse. The horse that's behind cannot see me. So as they gallop towards me, the horse that's right in the middle is going to decide to go on my right hand. And that's going to surprise the heck out of the horse that's behind him, because suddenly when he goes to the right, I'm going to be there standing right in front of him. And in fact, he did bump me, almost knocked me over when he went by. Sometimes you get a picture more by good luck than by good graces. Here's a case. I was shooting sea turtles in Mexico, and I was shooting them as they rose to the surface to eat. And I wanted to get a picture as they open their mouth, down their throat, looking in right into their mouth. And I shot this one too early. And when I looked at it then subsequently, I noticed that there was water coming out of its nose. And that's the first time I noticed, I didn't see that as I was shooting. First time I noticed that these, like a iguana, they often get fluid in their nasal passages and they blow that out when they come to the surface. But it doesn't always have this kind of shape. Usually it's just kind of a mist. So this photograph won the wildlife category in that other contest I was telling you about. And indeed, it was lucky for me because the prize was an underwater camera, a Nikon camera. So mostly when we travel, we shoot people. We like to shoot people. And that there's a reason we carry 2 cameras, because sometimes you can give one of your cameras to the people you're shooting. They can shoot each other and they can shoot you back. You have some selfies to take home, but you get some great pictures of them interacting with each other. I like to shoot old people, even like a blind lady. In this case, look at the flies in her right eye, the left eye as we look at it. So old people or young people. Notice here's another case of me moving her a little bit to the left so she's not in the middle or she's not to the right. Almost to give you that feeling that she's escaping a little bit from where she wanted to be when she sees me. Beautiful people, I love to shoot beautiful people, men and women, and even so not so beautiful people often find their way into my lens. I'm often asked, is there a favorite theme to my photographs? I can tell you honestly, until I started these series of lectures, which I've given to now to more than 75 camera clubs around the world during COVID, I didn't know there was a theme. So only when I examined the photographs to give the talk that I recognized that I do have a theme. And that's, I like to shoot relationships. A lot of my pictures show relationships like between a mother and baby. And this picture works, I think, because the mom is looking directly into the camera, but the baby's pink tongue draws your eye down to her nipple and he's looking into the camera too. So your eye goes from her eyes to the baby's eyes and back to her eyes again. And that rotary motion, that circular motion, draws you into the picture. Or here's a case of siblings that I love to shoot, with sisters and brothers together. These 2 kids in Laos were just marvelous to take their picture. They were so helpful and the expressions on their face. But look at the kids. They have spotless hands, spotless faces, spotless feet. That's because this little girl, she's not very old, but she's charged with taking care of her little brother all day long. And she knows she's charged with keeping him clean. But of course, she can't do the laundry and the mother and dad work all day long. So the laundry gets very dirty, but the hands, the face, the feet of the kids are sparkly. Here's a case in the zoo in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where I was shooting this giraffe and a little girl came in with a stick with 3 leaves on the end, 3 bright green leaves. And she held it up for the giraffe. The giraffe leaned over the fence and plucked the leaves very carefully off the end of the stick, but left the stick for the little girl to take away as a souvenir. And of course, man and religion is a popular theme of many photographers. If you're shooting in Europe, man and religion really means shooting in churches. If you're in Southeast Asia, it's often man and fire. And man and signs is a relationship that I pursue a lot. This is a case where we are in New York City's Grand Central Station, and my wife Yana walked in front of the Apple sign. And when I saw that, I said, I have to take that picture. So I repositioned her back there, right in front of the sign. because she's an Apple girl. She's a Mac girl. She's a techie. She learned enough on her own, although she was a chief financial officer of a consulting firm. She learned enough Apple and Mac stuff that she built the website that I have now. And she's in the process of reviving it. It was built for a Valentine's present about 3 years ago. Well, here we are in the Louvre in Paris in the museum, and this is a Black Lives Matter photograph. We think it's Black Lives Matter because by the kinky hair in the girl in front of the picture, she looks like she's black, but there's nothing to say for sure she is black. The girl that's in the painting was taken to Paris in 1920 as a slave. And of course, sometimes there are things like this, windsurfers that are surfing the ocean in Israel, and they go out and around the gunboat that's going up and down the beach and back in again to the great cheers of all the sailors on board the ship. I thought that this was neat because it's got the joy of the windsurfers and the military in the same photograph. I consider that to be an allegory of the Israeli culture because the citizens in Israel enjoy life even when there's an obvious military presence. They're undeterred by the military presence. And sometimes you get a relationship between animals. This is a giant southern petrel that's eating a penguin chick, and the two parents of the penguin chick are in the background. Now, to get this photograph, I had to lie in the snow. Those of you who've had the have been fortunate enough to go to Antarctica know that the snow in Antarctica is not white where the penguins are. It's all full of penguin poop. So to get this picture, you're lying in the penguin poop to make sure you can get the penguins in the same picture. Nobody wanted to get back in the boat with me when I got back up again. And even relationships in a photograph like this between two landscapes, you think that would be hard to do, but in the background is Mount Ararat in Turkey. Mount Ararat is the place where Noah's Ark is purported to have been found. And in the foreground, the green is Armenia, and this is a Corvira, the Christian monastery where St. Gregory was imprisoned for 13 years. Now, the background size and color and everything completely dominates the foreground in this area, just as the Turks in Turkey completely dominate the Armenian Christians, leading to the Armenian genocide, where the Turks killed more than 1 million people about 100 years ago. So there we are, relationship in a landscape. More important sometimes, I think, for photographers are the social aspects. And we don't think about this very often, but when you travel, but I'm sure you think about it when your club meets together. The social aspects are important because you need to get along with your photo companions. So when we travel, when Jan and I travel, we go by ourselves a lot of the time, but often we go with 2 or 4 or 6 other friends, but we all have the same kind of equipment. I don't mean we all have Nikons or Canons or Sonys, but we all have DSLRs. So, and these days I'd say we all have mirrorless as well. We all have short lenses and long lenses. And what this means is if you see something important, you all get the same distance away from the subject, so you're not in each other's way. And the people that you're traveling with have to have the same kind of appetites. If you're traveling with vegetarians, it's nice if you're a vegetarian too. If there are no meat eaters on the trip, that's okay. But if there's all meat eaters and one vegetarian, it's an unhappy time. So you need people that you can get along with, because usually you're in the same bus, the same car for days on end. So like the people that you travel with. More important still, however, is how you interact with subjects. So I ask you and your members of your camera club, if you were to shoot this beggar, would you shoot it from across the street with a 300mm lens or a 250mm lens? Would you not want to have her know that you're taking the picture? Would you want to be part of the landscape yourself? Or would you get up close and a little bit personal? But so this fellow is looking back at me, but he's not speaking to me. He's not smiling at me. He's not interacting with me. You can shoot him with a 70 or 100mm lens and get this kind of a picture. For me, it's entirely different. I like to shoot up close and personal. This woman in Armenia, I shot after spending about 5 minutes talking with her. She was selling scarves, and I saw her watery eye and decided that she'd make a good portrait. But in order for me to take the picture where I wanted to, up close, then I had to develop a relationship with her. So I bought 2 scarves from her for $5 a piece. And only after I bought the scarves and we had a little chat, she's chatting in Armenian and I'm chatting in English because I don't speak Armenian. But only after that was done that I raised my camera to my face and say, can I take your picture? Well, think of it now. I'm the customer. She's the vendor. Is she going to say no to me? Of course not. I've just given her $10. So she is compelled to give something back to me and she lets me take her picture on that basis. So I didn't go up to the Moroccan rug seller and say, can I take your picture? I developed a relationship first. I engaged her first so that we already had a relationship when finally I asked to take her picture. And engaging when we're traveling is very easy for me because Yana has bright green eyes and a big smile. And she's just somebody that people like to engage with. She's very friendly. So wherever we go, people come up to her and put their arm around her and talk to her. And I get have the advantage then I can take a picture of the people that are engaging Yana. I get to take a picture of them. And such was the case in Egypt when Yana and I were sitting in a tuk-tuk, and this young fellow came up and he got his nose no more than a foot from Yana's nose, looking right into her green eyes. And so sitting beside her, I just whistled softly and he turned his eyes and looked at me and I snapped off a picture. She was too close for the picture, but I got a little picture of him. So engaging your subjects, I think, is the way to get much more intimate shots. Here's one of the pygmies of the Batwa tribe in Uganda. These are the sorriest people you ever want to meet anywhere. They got kicked out of the jungle when the jungle was nationalized for the gorilla park. And now they have no land, they have no jobs, they have no place to stay. They're a sorry lot, very poor. And this is all reflected in this young fellow's face. So you can see I'm not very far away from him. So it's very easy for me to try and smile and to get him some reaction from him. Here he's not smiling, but you can see his eyes have changed from looking sour or dour in this case to looking a little bit interested, at least to me. And then by making a funny fish face and a squeaking sound, I was able to get him a smile. And as unfortunate as these people are, this is the picture that reminds me of what they could become. Not the little boy in the first picture, but they could be, with some help, they could return to this kind of a thing. Here's a case where I tried to use the vendor and the customer approach on a lady who had great gold teeth in Georgia. Georgia being Russia, not America. She was selling bottles of water and I wanted to take her picture. So of course, I did the customer thing. I went up and bought a bottle of water from her. And I said, can I take your picture? And she raised her hand to her mouth and she said, no. So I paid her the $1 and I took the bottle of water. I went over, Yana was taking pictures of somebody else, gave her the bottle of water, came back and said, I'd like another bottle of water. And so she gave me the water and I paid her the $1. And before walking away, I said, can I take your picture? She kind of chuckled and she said, no. She raised her hand to cover her teeth. I bought 5 bottles of water and gave them away to people that were in our group before she finally didn't put her hand over her mouth, but just tilted her head back and laughed because she knew that I was going to come back here for as long as it took to get that picture of her. So it's not in perfect focus because she was moving at the time, but it's good enough for a little story anyways of the customer and the vendor. Sometimes you have to engage not with just one person, but with a group of people, and that can be a little more difficult. Here we are in Tanzania shooting some Maasai warriors, and these Maasai warriors, as probably some of you know, they love to get around a little circle for the tourists and chant and jump up as high as they can in the air with their sticks. And I wanted a picture that was different than I'd ever taken when I'd seen them before. So I gave one of my Sony cameras to one of the warriors and I took his cloak and his stick. And I imagined in my mind, if I got high enough and I could get him low enough to the ground, he could shoot up with a wide angle lens and he could get me above the heads of the people behind. So I would jump and he would click the shutter, but he never clicked the shutter when I was at the maximum height. So I said, there's got to be a way around this. So I put the camera on 20 frames a second. I said, when I say go, you press the button. When I say stop, you let the button go. So I went into the middle, said go, and then when he had the button pressed, it was going brrrr. I jumped as high as I could. When I came down again, he's still going brrrr. I got 120 pictures of me jumping. Whoops. Did I do that accidentally? 120 pictures of me jumping. But the Maasai warriors were so enthralled with all this that then they invited us back to their village, and we saw that they had a brand new school, and we photographed them in their huts, and they're still building this relationship with them, all because I would do this at the time. So when we travel, I'm often asked, do we use guides or do we go on our own? Well, the truth is we do both. But if you're going to go for a guide, you have to know what to expect. The best guides will understand what's required to get photographs. They won't want to tell you the history of the area. They're interested in photographs too, and they're looking for ways to get those for you. So here we are in India at the Pongal festival, and see the red arrows in the top right-hand corner. If Yana and I had gone on our own, which we sometimes do, to the Pongal festival, we would have got seats in those bleachers that are just bamboo roped together, and behind the walls that are just temporary walls put up, they're made of bamboo as well. That's not where the action is going to happen, and I didn't want to be behind a wall. I wanted to be photographing where the green arrow is. And because this is essentially a bull rodeo, that's what they would call it anyway. It's a bull rodeo, but they're using Brahma bulls. So using a guide, he got us to a place where we were looking down on where the action was. That's where the green arrow is. And not only was it a great place to shoot from, but it was a sturdy building. And best of all, you know, those of you who've been in India, you can never be too far from a bathroom. And lo and behold, where we're sitting, there's a toilet right behind us. So sometimes in India, you need bathrooms very quickly, and they're right there for us. Looking down on the action, and action it was too. They released these bulls, and these guys in the yellow t-shirts have to jump on the back of the bull by holding onto the hump and get dragged about 100 meters down that alley where the red arrows were. And the guy who hangs on the longest, holds on the longest, he's going to win the day. Here's a guy who's got it. Unfortunately, there can only be one guy on the bull at a time to win. So it's very difficult sometimes because all the other guys are trying to get you off. Even if you get on there, between the bull and the bull's horns and the action, they're trying to pull you off and grab the bull by themselves. So it's a very, very dangerous sport. And indeed, the weekend we were there were 25 of these guys in southern India, not just in this location, but in southern India, who died as they were fighting these bulls, and more than 2,400 spectators were injured where the bulls crashed through the little screens on either side of the alleyway into the crowd. The best guides, of course, you'd think it would be a natural thing to understand this, but sometimes it isn't when you travel. The best guides have to speak the local language. So if you're in the Omo Valley, you need somebody who speaks this tribe's language, and you need somebody who speaks her language as well, which is entirely different. If you don't have that, you can't go to the villages. There's no way to get into them without speaking their language. And they have to have good local connections. This is not set up for you ahead of time. They have to know people. So here we are in Namibia, the Himba in northern Namibia number about 50,000, and they live in villages like this. But to go to a village and to photograph it, this is their private space. You have to know somebody. And if you know the chief and are willing to bring him, as we did, a trunk load of groceries that he can hand out to his people, then he says, come on in and do your thing, photograph everybody you want. And you can spend an afternoon or a morning there shooting the people as they go about their daily life. This lady obviously at the hairdresser, and engaging with the people, particularly the young kids. And they eventually, even though you can't speak the same language, they eventually come up and talk to you. And in one case, this little boy came and grabbed my hand and dragged me into his house, wanted to show me that where he lived, he was very proud of it. And he took me around from place to place and said, this is the cloak that I use in the wintertime. This is my sister's cloak. This is where I sleep. This is where my mom sleeps. this is where my auntie sleeps. And I was curious about what he meant by auntie, but the Himba men can have 4 or 5 wives. So sometimes there'll be more than one mom in the same hut, depending on how big the hut is. But this little boy was obviously very, very proud of the size of the hut he had and the wealth that his family exhibited in the tribe. Of course, if you go to someplace like Bhutan, you don't need a guide. You can go on your own because the people are very friendly. Many of them speak English. It's very colorful. But again, you need the good local connections, because to shoot in one of the monasteries is usually prohibited. You can go in and look when there are prayers like this, but often there are signs that say no cameras. But our guide, Joe Englander, who's an American fellow who specializes in Bhutan, knew all the monks in this particular monastery, and we got great privileges, not only shooting with prayers, but even the young boys when they were at their lessons. This is a shot that I usually call swimming upstream. One part of the picture is looking in one direction, the rest are all looking in the other direction. To get into these lessons was a great honor. Or in this case, the yellow hat ceremony that they only perform once a year, they put in for Yana and I and Joe. They put on that day. It's about an hour of blowing their horns and beating on their drums. And we shot under them, over them, behind them, in front of them, in their faces, reading the same music that they read. At one point, I actually lay on my back with my fisheye lens underneath these long horns. And when we're done, they served us tea and cookies and wanted to know about Canada and what it was like there and what other kind of things we were shooting, and sent us on a little trek to shoot a nunnery that was being built that we would have never known about. So we got great shots there too, all because we engaged the people and we had people with us who had good connections. But most importantly, though, the best guides have to be good photographers, not just carry a camera, but they got to be good photographers. They have to know that if you want to go to Greece and shoot Meteora, there's a time of day when Meteora is lit up, the monastery is in bright sunshine, and the background is in shade. That's the time to get that picture. Or if you're in Armenia and you're in this church, you better be there at 10:30 in the morning, because if you come at a different time, you'll find that the sunlight coming through the dome here impacts on Jesus' face, and the picture is wiped out. Even a famous place like Angkor Wat, where thousands of people go to shoot every day, if you have a guide who knows what he's doing, he doesn't get you there at the same time as the other 1,000 people. He gets you an hour ahead of time, and he places you on the lake exactly where the sun is going to come up, not behind one of the turrets, but in a low spot. So even if there's clouds in the sky, there'll be little bit of sun just before it goes behind the clouds, and you can get this spectacular picture of Angkor Wat reflected in the lake. And when it's done, of course, he doesn't want you to go into the temple. He wants you to go around to the back of the temple where the lake is there and take some daily life shots of this lady scooping the garbage off of the lake. Or how about this little boy who was swimming in his underwear in the lake, and he came ashore when he saw us photographing him, and then he came quite close to Yana, looked in her eyes, turned around and ran into the lake and picked her 3 flowers and came back out again, presented the 3 flowers to Yana. See, I don't have to do anything. I just have to stand there and I get the shots and Yana gets the flowers. Going on your own means, of course, that you have to be curious and you have to embrace adventures that present themselves. Here we are in India. We had a lot of work in India, so we were there for many years. And I was sitting in the limo one day, and this woman came and tapped on the window, and she was begging. And I had my camera with me. So instead of doing what most people do is look down, look away, I rolled down the window and I put my camera up and I said, "Can I take your picture?" And her daughter, pictured here, said, "Yes, go ahead." So I took this picture out of the window of the limo. And then I got out and talked to them about their life. And it turns out the young girl went to an English school in the afternoon. And in the morning, sorry, the other way around. Yeah, no. In the morning, she helped her mom beg. Her mom, she said, was a professional beggar. And her brother did half a day with the mom, and the little girl did half a day with the mom. And the rest of the time they were in an English school. She said her mom made her living this way because she was a single mom and she had to look after the little girl and the baby boy and the little brother as well. So I learned a lot about even begging can be a profession in some places. On another occasion, I was with my late wife and we were traveling, staying in hotels that were really royal palaces that were no longer being used. And we came across this little village that was sparkling clean, which would be unusual for India to see something like that. So we stopped and we went and photographed them, and I noticed that they were all women, except for one old guy. They were all women in this place, and some of them quite beautiful. And while we were there, and Mary was photographing them at the same time, a fellow came along on a motorcycle and started to chat her up. She could speak Hindi, so she got along fine with this guy. When we were done, I walked back to the car and said, "You didn't get many photographs?" She said, "No, this guy was chewing your ear off here." I said, "What did he want?" She said, he said with her blonde hair, she had blonde hair and blue eyes. She said, "With my blonde hair and blue eyes, I should come and work at this brothel as well, because we could make a lot of money. I would be the only blonde haired hooker for miles around." When you travel, of course, and you're on your own, you can't pass things by. You have to be curious. As an engineer, when I see a construction site like this, I have to stop and say, what exactly are they doing here? This was in Bhutan. We were on our way back to our hotel. The light had faded pretty well. And I came across this. Turns out to be an asphalt plant. These are Indian migrants that come across the border into Bhutan during the construction season to build the road. And I was flabbergasted to see how contamination was everywhere as the oil spilled out of these drums. But moreover, half the people who worked there were women, and many of them had babies on their backs or on their fronts. See the smudge on this woman's face. So it was a great opportunity to shoot these migrants when they went about their work. And I got this lovely shot of this mom in the background spilling out the oil while her two kids played in the drums. These two little kids stayed in this construction site from dawn until dusk every day. They had no toys. They didn't even, most of the time they were in bare feet. You can see the sandals on the gravel there. They had nothing to play with except the oil drums. And that's their life. Nighttime they'd go home and have something to eat. Probably had something to eat before they came in the morning. But other than that, it was a forlorn existence for sure. So I vowed right there and then to go back to Bhutan one winter and shoot the migrants for a couple of weeks and tell their whole story of how these people live. As I said before, going on your own, though, you have to be curious. If you're not going to get the great pictures. Those of you who've been to Southeast Asia, I've seen this picture many times. It's the young monks in the morning going to collect their daily breakfast. They go and beg in the square in the market, and people give them some rice or sometimes some rice and beans. So you see this picture a lot, but if you're curious, you have to ask yourself, what did it look like before these young boys came out of the monastery? So one morning I went to the monastery before the sun came up and just wandered around taking pictures, snapping pictures of them sleeping and getting up. And I got this lovely picture of these kind of teenage boys as they rose from the bed. You can see that they sleep on the floor in these plastic mats and they just have one or two blankets. And the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the silver containers that they used to go and beg for their meals too. It's a whole different scene than the scene that I showed, the first one that I showed you. Even in a place like Harar in Ethiopia, Harar is a walled city of about 150,000 people, but lo and behold, it doesn't have much for infrastructure. No water or sewer in most of the city. So the people have to go outside the walls into the desert to some municipal wells and collect their water for their daily use there and carry it back into the city. The city itself is like most of these kind of cities in Ethiopia, very small structures and commerce. This is a main commerce road and it's near the gate. So nothing much to shoot at that's spectacular. I wanted to capture a different side of Harar when I went there. So I went in the corner where the green building is in the upper right-hand corner, I could see there's an alleyway there. So I wanted to sneak down that alleyway and see, when people aren't engaging in commerce, what does it look like where they live? And I knew enough from getting lost from before that when I go into the back alleys, I always have this little thing that I carry on me, which tells me which way north is, which way south is, this little magnetic compass, because your GPS often doesn't work and there are no maps of these little alleyways. And I found some great shots. Here's a man coming back from the wells. He's got 4 or 5 jugs on his burro, so he's set for the whole day. He won't have to return and get some more. But there's not much water there and it's very scarce, so people have to conserve it. Here's a young girl who's washing her hair in a tub of water, but the tub only has about a ½ an inch of water in the bottom. So she's got this bar of soap. She's got to wet her hair, wash her hair, and then rinse her hair, all in that ½ an inch of water. So while I consider this to be an okay shot for a shot, you just want to show your neighbor, hey, I was in Ethiopia, look how little water they have. There's nothing magical about the photo. There's nothing engaging about the photo. It's more just a snapshot. To get something better, I took my camera and I approached her and I put my camera in the tub with the water. So I was looking right at her face, shooting up at her. I didn't have my camera to my face. I just held it above the water and shot up at her like this. And I get this beautiful Mona Lisa smile, which shows how intimate it is that even you can see the soap running down the front of her dress. It's a completely different way to shoot than taking the snapshot like this. And you have a better story to tell as well. Of course, we all know that timing is everything in photography. If you want to get the blue arrow in the evening, you got to be there 15 or 20 minutes after sunset, because that's the only time the sky will be blue. If you want to shoot this baboon, you better be there within a couple of seconds of him opening his mouth to show the incisors. Or if you want to get the net above his hat, in this case, you've only got a fraction of a second to do that. Otherwise, the net is covering part of the man. And you've only got a microsecond or a millisecond to shoot 2 drops of water colliding. So timing is everything, but timing is everything in bucket list adventuring too. So if you're going to go to Tanzania, go during the Great Migration, where the grass is greener, there are more animals to see, they look healthier, their coats are slick. If you're going to go to Brazil to shoot the jaguars in the Pantanal, why not go when Carnival is on and kill 2 birds with 1 stone? And if you're going to go to Alaska or the Yukon Territory or the Northwest Territories to shoot bears, go during the salmon season. When the salmon are running, the bears congregate in the one place. There are many more of them, and they look really healthy. They're not all scrawny at that time of year. Even when you think about shooting the Aurora Borealis, here I am in Yellowknife. You can't time going up north to Iceland or Yellowknife or the far north to shoot the Aurora Borealis, because you don't know when it's going to be cloudy. But in Yellowknife, you can go there, and there's a fellow called Sean Norman, the Aurora Chaser, and he has a little van, and he takes people out specifically to shoot the northern lights, because he has real-time satellite images of where the cloud cover is. So he may drive you in the middle of the night a couple 100 kilometers so that there are no clouds. You can see in this picture on the horizon, there's a big cloud cover there. That was near the city of Yellowknife. And here we are here about 50 kilometers away from the cloud cover. And you can see the sky is clear in this location. Even strangely enough, in a place like Lalibela, the stone churches of Lalibela are famous. They were carved out of the bedrock when the hairy hordes of Muslims came across to Ethiopia to invade them. So the Christians carved these churches out of the bedrock. They're not constructed, mind you, they're just carved out of the rock. And you can, from a distance of about 50 meters, you can't see them. They blend in with the landscape. Most tourists come and they look down in the hole there and they see, oh yeah, this is what the Lalibela churches look like. But they don't go down there, because to get there, you have to go through a series of tunnels and cuts in the rock that is a bit unstable and dark, a bit treacherous. So they just shoot from up above. But if you go there on the right day of the year, which is Christmas Eve, you'll find that there are hundreds and hundreds of pilgrims that have come from miles around to spend the night, the whole of Christmas Eve. They sleep in that excavation. So you can go down with a flashlight and your camera and shoot some wonderful pictures of these people reading the scriptures and having prayers. It's a high ISO and a low shutter speed for sure. I couldn't shoot that today with my Parkinson's, but this was taken a few years ago before I was diagnosed. So you can get some wonderful, especially if your camera will get you acceptable pictures at ISO 25,000 or 50,000. But even in Ethiopia, if you stay for New Year's, besides Christmas, stay for New Year's, you can go to the Timkat Festival. This would take having a good guide. You couldn't do this on your own because the Timkat Festival consists of the Ethiopian Orthodox Pope coming to this swimming pool in Addis Ababa, the capital, and blessing the water. And then he's going to spray the people with the water that have been waiting all night long for the Pope to come. So we had an excellent guide there that got us media passes to be inside the swimming pool. And here I am shooting the Pope from a distance of about 8 feet. Fantastic opportunity. And then when he was ready to spray the people, there I was right in front of him. And of course, he looked up and saw my Canon camera and he sprayed me in the face and the chest and my camera as well too. But I was able to get a couple of pictures of the pilgrims in ecstasy as they got blessed by the Ethiopian Pope. In bucket list adventuring, sometimes things just don't work out no matter how you plan them. Most of it's not planned, but sometimes it is. In Vietnam, we got some great pictures because we had a great guide who's a wonderful photographer, wins very, very many medals with the PSA, gold medals, just cover the walls of his home in Saigon. So he took us around to where there were some great landscapes, some great people, some great daily life shots. But I was mostly intrigued by, in Hanoi, there are motorcycles, motorbikes everywhere. There are actually 7 million motorbikes in Hanoi, and there are only 8 million people. Everybody has a motorbike. The motorbikes go on the roadways where there are no lines. So you don't have to stay on the right side or the left side. They go every which way, crossways. And to cross a street like this, you just have to walk through the motorbikes at the same speed. Because the motorbikes, unlike in America, these guys only want to travel at about 20 miles an hour. So they're slow enough that they can weave around you, but you can't stop. You have to keep moving. I wanted to capture that idea of this traffic that signifies what Hanoi is for me. And I tried all sorts of things, long exposure, short exposures. And then I saw this picture where this lady was crossing in a crosswalk. I was on a slow shutter speed to get the traffic out of focus and blurry. As she crossed, I thought, this is the picture, changing the background perhaps a little bit. This is the picture that would signify what Hanoi traffic means to me. But she's a little bit blurry because I'm shooting on about 20th or 10th of a second, as I recall. So she's a little blurry. I needed a woman like this to come and stand still in the middle of traffic while I shot her. That way the traffic could be blurry while she was sharp. And I waited and waited and waited. And after about 5 minutes, this lady came along. So I held out my hand because I needed her to stop. And I wanted to tell her, go in the middle, stop there, and I'll take your picture. But when I held out my hand, she grabbed onto mine very tightly and she dragged me into the traffic because she thought that I was a tourist who was afraid to cross here. So she was being the good Vietnamese person and helping this tourist to cross the road. So lucky for me, my wife had her wits about her and she's on a slow shutter speed too, so it's a bit blurry, but she got me crossing with this lady. I'll go back to this spot, or maybe one with a bit less confused background, and retake that perhaps with a model. The last thing I want to talk to you about in style is, as a bucket list adventure, you have to consider what your risk tolerance is for unfamiliar situations, because without risk, there can be no adventure. The adventure comes from the fact that you're at risk part of the time. And if you're a traveler to these kind of places, of course, the biggest risk you have outside of perhaps COVID today is food poisoning. And food poisoning is no fun, so you have to make sure you you're eating the right stuff and you're drinking the right stuff, and not from stalls like this, although not everybody gets sick when they eat here, but some people do. So risk is important, but there's different kinds of risk. Here we are in Antarctica, and these people, I think there's 10 of them, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. 9 of them. Guyana is the one with the red toucan on the right-hand side. They're all swimming in the Antarctic Ocean. And I was to go in with them too, but I stopped to take the picture and I looked at them. I had my bathing suit on, and I thought to myself, if that water is really cold, these guys don't look all that old. I'm able to get into that water and my heart's liable to stop. And if that happens, I'm going to die right here in Antarctica. They're going to take me back to that boat in the background, but they're not going to send me back to Canada. They're going to be hanging me up in the meat locker there in the freezer for a couple of weeks until the boat will dock again. I don't want to be the guy who's hung up in the meat locker. So I decided not to go in. A wise move. Sometimes you think you're wise because as a cowboy, as a wannabe cowboy, I'm used to having cattle and horses on my ranch and sheep sometimes ranch. So being close up to the water buffalo would never deter me from taking a picture like this. But even there's some risks. In India, I tried that to this cow and it licked the front of my fisheye lens. It took me 3 days to get all the grit off the lens, and it was never the same after that. Even in a case like this, where this fellow obviously wants his picture taken, my colleague that was standing beside me said, Mike, don't take his picture. He's saying, no, don't take my picture. I don't want my picture taken. I said, look carefully. He's not saying don't take my picture. He's saying, I want 10 rupees to have my picture taken. So of course I gave him 10 rupees and then took his picture where her eyes were in focus. His hand was out of focus. It's all in your perspective. Or how about this fellow in Shanghai? I came across these 2 old gentlemen playing some sort of board game. I was sneaking down a back alley in Shanghai, and I took my camera and I raised it as high as I could over the board, and I was shooting down on the tops of their heads onto the table. And this guy looked up and he yelled loudly and he jumped up and he actually jumped at me and grabbed the front of my camera with his dirty hand. And I had my fisheye lens on in that way too. I didn't mean to take the picture, but he so scared me that as I was jumping out of the way of his hand, I accidentally clicked the shutter and got this picture. Sometimes you're in situations where you just don't know, is this risky or not? Here we are in a town in Africa, and we're the only 2 white people that we've seen for quite a long time. And we're shooting in a square, and I wanted to get the women were all draped in white. And you can see them in the background of it there. So I wanted to get a picture of these women. And pretty soon I'm accosted by these fellows. Are these guys friendly or not friendly? Do they think I'm a friendly tourist? Do they want to take my camera or grab my money or what? Those are the kind of risks that you have to endure. So you never know what to do in this case. You don't know the right thing or the wrong thing. So rather than take the pictures of the women in white, which is the picture that I wanted, I made these fellows the subjects. So I lay on the ground and had them in a little huddle around me, shot up at them with their faces looking down on me, shot above them, had them take the camera and shoot each other. So I made it about them to get them to be friendly instead of got the real picture that I wanted. And we left that place. I never did get the picture that I wanted, but I got some pictures of some guys who turned out to be friendly, but I didn't know that when we started. I knew enough, however, that sometimes you have to pay people to get their picture. And if you're going to pay people, sometimes you can negotiate, but you never negotiate with somebody who's got a loaded firearm with them, because you may want to spend $2 and they may want $3, but you don't want to get into an argument with them. I didn't have to pay this young fellow. He was perfectly friendly, but I ran into later his father or his uncle or somebody when we were going down the road, and we stopped to take a picture of him because he was with his wife. And the guy that we were with got into an argument with the father or uncle, whoever he was. And I thought to myself, Yana, just get back in the car and put your foot on the gas, because if anything happens here, we want to get away as quickly as possible. He was armed as well, so you have to be careful. But you can assess whether you have an appetite risk yourself. Think of when you see a parade. When you see a parade, do you take the parade shot from the sidewalk? Or do you muscle your way into the middle of the parade, crouch down and shoot them from there? What about when people are not looking too friendly? Remember the yellow vests in Paris that were setting off bombs and starting fires and complaining about taxes in Paris a few years ago? It was okay to shoot them from the front, but how would they feel if I got into the middle of that parade? I was uncertain. I know for sure that when the bombs went off and the fires got started, there were a lot of police around there. Jan and I gravitated towards the fire and the bombs, not gravitated away. But we got so close, we were all tear gassed by these police. Or sometimes it's not somebody external to you, it's how you feel about something. So in Thaipusam, in southern India, they have a religious ceremony where they practice body piercing. And then they march through the streets to clear the sins of all their family. So the more they pierce the body, the worse it is, then the better chance they have of fixing things for the sinners. So here's a shot of two fellows that are hanging by hooks from these telephone poles. This is just a shot of the sidewalk. I can tell you the little story about them, but if you're a photographer and you want a good picture of them, you got to get much closer. You got to show the hook in his back. You got to show that he's pierced his cheek with his little spear. But you got to really, to get the picture, you got to look into his eyes and say, this is what he's doing for his religion. I like this picture with the blue sky in it, but I felt compelled to take another because the bottom right-hand corner is all confusing. So I lay on my back between the two of them and I waited for the truck to roll over me to the point that the sun was behind the little stick on the left-hand guy. And I was just able to roll off the street in time to get out of the way of the truck, which didn't stop. After so many adventures, people ask, is there one that stands out the most? Well, indeed there is. And that was some years ago in Uganda. We were there to shoot the wild mountain gorillas. And the wild mountain gorillas are in the jungle. You have to go in the jungle, you have to find them. They migrate through the jungle, so it's a little, you walk and they walk and you try and have your guides know where the gorillas are, that you can catch up to them, because the gorillas they don't stay in one place for any length of time. So here's Jana hacking her way through the jungle. For us, we were lucky, we found the gorillas after about 3 hours of walking in an open glade. So unlike most people, the light was good here for these guys. We got them when they were feeding, and there lots of bright light on their coats. But it was only about 20 minutes that they decided to go back in the jungle for a little sleep. And when they went in there, we were shooting them. The light's a lot lower now, and it's hard to shoot. There's Jan in the bottom left-hand corner. She's shooting this mother with his baby. And the mother looks up and sees Jana's face and her eyes and decides to approach Jana. She comes right up to Jana and she puts her hand on Jana's thigh and looks at her face for about 30 seconds. They were just nose to nose. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that is the neatest thing to happen. And while I felt wonderful for Jana because it was a rare experience, I felt kind of sorry for myself because I've always wanted to touch a gorilla. And I thought to myself, why couldn't this happen to me? And so I went off on my own to shoot the gorillas. And I got some males that would look me in the eye. Sometimes they say you can't look the gorillas in the eye, but I've got these young fellows that look me in the eye. And just by imagining that I was speaking to them mentally, I was projecting my thoughts through the ether, that I could convince them that I was somebody safe, that they could come towards. And indeed they did. This fellow would take 2 steps forward and sit down and take 1 step back, and 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Pretty soon I got this guy to come very close, so I couldn't focus anymore. And I noticed he was only on 3 legs. So I thought, maybe I could just reach out my hand and he would shake my hand like a dog does, shake a paw. So I held my hand out like this as he came forward. And indeed, without saying anything, he just reached over and he put his paw into my hand. It felt like a dog's paw. That's what it felt like. But to me, it was electric. It was like I had touched the universe. It was like I had touched the hand of God. It was so thrilling. And so that became for me the greatest bucket list adventure of my lifetime. So if you'd like to be a bucket list adventurer, I have a little bit of advice. The first one is travel when you can. That's a rare thing when you say that with COVID. The day when you can't will come all too soon. And that might be today. Is you can't travel to some of these places without taking a big risk. If you're going to go, though, be sure you pick suitable travel companions. They'll make or break your trip. And of course, don't choose a history tour. If you're interested in photographs, choose a photo safari style tour if photography is important to you. And my last piece of advice is simply this. When you travel, just try to be brave and just follow the signs. Because in spite of what you're told sometimes, the world outside of North America is mostly a very safe place, and it deserves to be investigated by photographers like you. Thank you very much. If you'd like to just unmute yourselves, and I'll take any questions. And I'm going to stop sharing. So take your mutes off and let's hear your questions or comments. You can put them on the chat line too if you like, and we can read them out. We'll have Janet read them out if they're on the chat line maybe.
I have a question. Weren't you afraid for your wife when that gorilla came up to her?
No, I didn't see that we were in any danger. No. I think
I would have been a little bit nervous.
well, yeah, I wasn't nervous, but I can tell you that the silverback, the big male that is like the ruler of the little family, we didn't go too close to him. I got with him maybe. You're not allowed to approach the gorillas within 20 feet, but if they approach you, you don't have to walk away. But to the big male, I got maybe 12 feet away, and then he looked at me and I thought he was a bit bigger than me in some respects, and I think he could hammer me into the ground if he wanted to, so I didn't. But the little guys that would weigh maybe 100 pounds, they could bite you or hurt you, but they were friendly gorillas. I don't know what a friendly gorilla is, but yes, no, I wasn't worried. No. I'd be more worried about some guys we travel places. Some guy comes along and puts his arm around Yana. More worried about that. Yeah, that happens quite frequently. Any other questions?
I don't see, just some comments on thank you in the chat. There are no questions in the chat. So if anyone has questions, you need to unmute yourself and speak up.
Just want to comment on the quality of the show. It was amazing. I really appreciate you bringing it to us.
Oh, thanks, Marty. It was nice to do it. It's always a pleasure to speak to other photographers who are interested in this kind of stuff, and especially a whole group of people that is so smiling all the time.
Mike,
Yes.
when you're taking pictures of these citizens in their country and their town, and if you wanted to publish any of those pictures, you have to worry about getting a release, or even if you're not going to publish, do you have to worry about getting a release?
So I clearly don't know the good answer to that. I carry a little card that says Michael Connor Bucket List Adventure, and on the back of that card is a release form, an abbreviated release form. I have used that rarely because I never sell the pictures. People sometimes ask to buy them, but I don't sell them. I just give them to people. Give them the raw file if they like, or a JPEG, because they'd have some use for it where I wouldn't. So I don't know the answer to that, but I haven't tested it. I suppose if you got an incriminating picture of a person and it wound up on a billboard someplace and the person saw it, or somebody that they knew saw it, you could be talking to a lawyer, but that's never happened to me. So I don't usually, I publish them on my website, the pictures on my website, but and sometimes I put them on Facebook or Twitter sometimes, but I don't publish them in for commercial use. And I think that
Sometimes contests require,
releases.
a release.
Yeah.
But from what you said, you'd only submitted a couple of images to contests. So.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of questions that have come in on the chat. Steve wants to know how many countries you have been to. And because he said it seems like you showed at least 50.
Well, to be honest, Steve, I don't know. I've never counted them, but I can tell you that I'm not at 100 yet. But if I went to Europe, I've never been to Europe. I shouldn't say never been to Europe. Of course, I've been to Europe. I've never done Europe. Get on the bus, get off the bus. If this is Tuesday, it must be Belgium, or you take the cruise to 14 countries as you go. I've never done that. So most of the countries I've never been to. But if I did that, I would be over 100. And Jana says, with my Parkinson's, as long as I can walk, we're not doing Europe and churches. When I'm in a wheelchair, she'll take me there and we can do that. Hopefully that's not going to happen in the immediate future. So.
And we have a comment here. Love the adventures. You are lucky to have a spouse who is a photographer and a couple of friends who are also photographers.
Yes, Jana was not a photographer when I first got together with her. So we had our first couple of adventures to like Singapore and Hong Kong. And she was always borrowing my camera because I carried two. So finally I decided she should have her own camera. We're in Hong Kong and she bought for herself a little digital camera. It was only this big, but she kept around and she didn't know much about photography. So she carried that camera on with her. But one day we were in a rug factory and she had to use the bathroom. And of course it was a squat toilet in the bathroom. And the squat toilet is just really a sloped area with a pipe in the middle. And as she bent down to go, the camera, which was on her belt, slipped off and went down the hole. So when she came back, she was very sad-faced. She came back to the bus and I said, was everything okay? She said she didn't want to talk about it. It took about half an hour till she described to me that she dropped her camera in the toilet and there was no amount of rubbing it that she was going to get all the stuff off. So it wouldn't have happened if it was a bigger camera. So we got her a bigger camera and wouldn't go down the hole. So, and then she's become a very good photographer. She's got a different eye than I have, and she sees people differently. So it's a pleasure to see that happen to her. And she's now, it's a good way to spend time. All the people that you see that we travel with, we met on travel trips. So they were not friends before that. We met them, some good friends in Kentucky, some others in Michigan, etc. And we travel the world with those people when we can. And if I decide to go to Timbuktu, I just send an email to them and say, Jana and I are going to Timbuktu in August. Anybody interested? And invariably, if we send that out to 6 people, 2 at least will come back and say, what are the dates? We want to come with you. And we do it on that basis. So.
When was your last trip, given COVID? When were you last abroad?
We were in 2020, January and February, we were in Peru. And we came out of the jungle 2 days before they closed the airport in Lima due to COVID. We had no idea that COVID was going on because we weren't in any place, looking at news or anything like that. So we didn't have any idea what it was. That was our last trip. Jana has been on 2 little trips since then. She was on a photo workshop here in Alberta, shooting at Emerald Lake for a week 2 weeks ago with another professional photographer. And she went to see her sister in Vancouver once. But I'm sticking close to home until it's time to go, which might not be tomorrow.
I know.
Yes. Another comment, great presentation, love the humor, the information and your humor.
Thank you very much. You can, I'll take it, when you send me the video, I'll take out the little comments about Yana dropping her camera in the toilet, just in case she ever sees the video. She said, "You didn't tell that story, did you?"
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. You've been very kind tonight. And I wish you no COVID and lots of good pictures and getting together in person as soon as you can. Be much appreciated.
Yeah,
All right, thank you and good night.
Thank you,
Good night.
Mike.
thank you.